Tonight on Primetime Politics, the uncertainty ahead.
Enbridge has talked about wanting to expand production. Trans Mountain has talked about it. South Bow has talked about it.
The Alberta Premier is out selling her vision for a pipeline and the MOU signed last week with Ottawa. But how open is British Columbia to a new bitumen pipeline? We'll speak with BC's Minister of Energy, Adrian Dix. Also,
I hope people today feel a lot more confident that Canada works than they did a couple of days ago.
we'll examine the opposition Premier Smith is facing from within her own party, despite Ottawa's move to repeal environmental regulations and support pipelines. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith responded today to comments made by her British Columbia counterpart. Over the weekend, BC Premier David Eby said he would be open to a new pipeline if Ottawa maintained the tanker ban off the province's northern coast. Now, this follows a memorandum of understanding that was signed by Alberta and Ottawa last Thursday, an MOU on energy and pipelines. For her part, Danielle Smith says she appreciates the sensitivity surrounding the oil tanker moratorium, but for now still favors a pipeline that would end in Prince Rupert.
But remember, the decision is in the hands of the federal government. Trade and commerce, ports, these are Canadian waters, these are Canadian ports, and that's why the MOU that I had with the Prime Minister I think is so important. But we want to get as much buy-in, and we want to have as much benefit for British Columbians as we possibly can, and that includes British Columbia First Nations. So we started that process. People now know that we're serious, and we're going to continue on.
Well, joining us now is Adrian Dix, British Columbia's Minister for Energy and Climate Solution. Minister, thank you for taking the time.
Great to be on the show, Michael.
So this is the first time that you and I have had a chance to speak since Alberta and Ottawa signed that MOU last week. And it seems like your Premier is now open to talking about a new pipeline, but he does not want it to go to the BC North Coast. So what's the alternative here?
Well, we've talked about it from the beginning. There are less expensive alternatives for Alberta than the one that's suggested in this MOU. We've made this case in terms of optimization. Most pipeline capacity expansion in North America, indeed in the world, are optimization projects now. It's not building new pipelines. This one doesn't make sense. There's no proponent, there's no business plan, there's no possibility of the cost being suggested that there would be the kind of contracts. After all, shippers have to pay the tolls to pay for pipelines in theory. The only exception to that is TMX, of course, where the taxpayer has subsidized it to the tune of $18 billion, and that's an exception to that. So we made the case from the beginning that they can optimize other arrangements and get the same capacity. If you look at the most recent report on pipeline capacity by the Toronto Dominion Bank, it says that there's 1.1 million barrels per day of potential capacity for Alberta at very inexpensive costs, and we've been making this point for some time. That said, this particular proposal, which means a lifting of the tanker ban, this particular proposal, which is not economic and will cause disruption and negatively affect other projects, is not, in my view, a serious proposal in any event, even if the federal government has relieved Alberta of a number of major climate obligations.
Okay, listen, I'll dig into a couple of those pieces. And you talk about pipeline optimization. And when you go through this MOU, of course, you also mentioned TMX. They are looking towards optimizing TMX and getting more through that pipeline and get that out to Tidewater. But they also want, in addition to that, though.
It's exactly the opposite, Michael. It's exactly the opposite. What they're saying is that TMX doesn't matter in their analysis of the situation. That's what the MOU says, which is, I think, a very strange thing to say.
Well, sorry to interrupt. But they do want more out of TMX, but they want something on top of TMX.
They want 1 million barrels, they say, on top of that. That's what they say. But they essentially are excluding TMX. They have that option. They're excluding it as an option. It's not an inclusive option. It's an excluding it from consideration. So it's the opposite of what one would logically think they'd be doing. In any event, those options are obviously available to them and have been for time. And they've decided to go this route, which is a different route. From our perspective, the fundamentals stay the same. We got real projects in BC. North Coast Transmission Line, which I talked about, 300 meetings with First Nations. We have signed term sheets from many of them. We're proceeding on that project. That's a real project. This is, even in the view of the proponent, which is the province of Alberta, which so far has put in $14 million for a communications plan, won't be started until, I don't know, they won't even have a proposal to consider until sometime towards the middle of next year. So I know that it's important to spend time on these projects that are, far-fetched. We'd like to spend our time talking about the dozens of real projects in BC. And by real, I mean projects approaching final investment decisions, real projects, not ones without proponents.
Okay, so when the Premier says this weekend he would be open to talking about a new pipeline if the moratorium on tankers was respected, is he being frank that he is willing to talk about a new pipeline, or is he trying to divert people back to TMX?
Quite the contrary. Quite the contrary. We have consistently engaged in a serious way with both Alberta and Ottawa on these issues. And Alberta and Ottawa have gone ahead with an MOU, which means the lifting of the tanker ban, which puts BC projects at risk and our coast at risk, and we're not in favor of that. And ignores possible ways to get, if that's what they want, more Alberta oil to other markets.
And that includes a new pipeline. That includes a new pipeline, or just optimization.
But with respect to TMX, look, what we're saying is we like to talk about real projects, and there isn't any. Right? We have always been willing to talk to the province of Alberta and the government of Canada. They proceeded along this line. This line, in my view, doesn't make any sense for our economy, puts real economic growth at risk, and is a significant problem for everyone. We've always been prepared to talk to them. I've always been prepared to talk to Minister Jean. The Premier's always talked to Premier Smith and the Prime Minister about these questions. But what they proposed last week, clearly, in our view, isn't economic, isn't a real project, puts significant BC investments at risk, and puts our coast at risk. And so we're not in favor of that.
Well, right now, as you know, everyone has heard from Premier Smith, she is working with several petroleum companies looking for a serious private proponent for a new pipeline project. She has 4 months to make that happen. If she does, is your province open to creating, helping build, making possible a new pipeline to go through BC to the coast?
It's not on us, Michael. What I find disconcerting about that question, with respect, I know you have to ask it, and these are the kinds of questions you ask, is it puts the fact that there's no proponent, no proposal on us. I mean, these things take a significant amount of time to plan. There's also no route and no potential customers, right? So the fact that they say they're looking for one is a stark contrast to NCTL, to LNG Canada 2, to Solistim's LNG, to dozens of mining projects where we have proponents such as some of the major companies in the province, Teck, and in the world, Teck and Newmont and others. These are all real projects. And I don't know why BC needs to be reacting to theoretical projects that they can't even find proponents for. And yeah, if they come up with someone who says we can sell this, then that would be something. The TMX proposal you're talking about, the project we're talking about, why is it of value? Well, it's because we've already spent the money on it. One of the largest subsidies in Canadian history from taxpayers. Everyone listening to us, including you and me, is paying for that, right? Right now, it's approximately 82 to 85% full, depending on the month, that project, and it could be made bigger. And Enbridge, of course, in its lines has optimization projects as well, projects combined with TMX that are about 1.1 million barrels. So, and they are a fraction of the cost of what this pipeline would be. Mm-hmm. So, a project has to make sense. And ultimately, in the world of a capitalist project, because the most important thing in the MOU is when they say they're not going to subsidize this thing, like that kind of project, it's got to make money at some level. And this one clearly would have to be massively subsidized by taxpayers' money. And I don't think Canadian taxpayers would feel the same way about the pipeline if they had to pay and subsidize it.
I'm listening to you right now, Minister, and I wonder what then your meetings were like this past weekend with the Federal Energy Minister, Tim Hodgson, who was in BC talking to you and to your government. What was your message to him? Were those discussions fruitful?
Well, very much the same, that We appreciate that the federal government has spent a lot of time on projects that really are still theoretical projects, including other things in the MOU. They talk about nuclear projects for 2050 or something and so on. Our message to him was pretty clear. We got real projects in BC. We're leading Canada. It's why we have the most projects on the major projects list. It's because they're shovel in the ground kind of projects. And we would like the federal government to focus on those projects, focus on the real and not the politics. I mean, this project got, I guess, Premier Smith through the weekend convention. But really, the $14 million they're spending on is $14 million invested in communications. And it's an MOU, not a project approval, because there ain't no project. And so our message to Minister Hodgson, and he was very good to come out here, and we had a very good discussion. I hold Minister Hodgson in high regard. Our message to him is, enough of the surreal. Let's return to the real.
Adrian Dix, thank you for this. I always appreciate the time.
Anytime. Take care, eh?
You too. So we'll follow where those talks between BC and Alberta go. But as we talk about fallout from the MOU, we should note that fallout is happening here in Ottawa as well. Take a look.
I, Mark Miller, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear.
Mark Miller is back in cabinet, sworn in today to replace Stephen Guilbeault as Minister for Canadian Identity, Culture and Official Languages. The Environment Minister, Julie Debruzin, added the nature portfolio to her list of responsibilities. And as for the Prime Minister's Quebec Lieutenant, well, that role has now been passed on to the Minister for Public Works and Procurement, Quebec MP Joël Lightbound, a redistribution of duties that Guilbeault did administer until resigning last Thursday from cabinet over his opposition to the MOU with Alberta. But if that memorandum is proving to be divisive among Liberals, it's also encountering opposition in Alberta, which we saw this weekend when Premier Danielle Smith was booed at a UCP convention after praising the deal in front of delegates.
Let's not throw in the towel and give up on our country just as the battle has turned in our favor and victory is in sight. It is. It is. Not what our fellow Canadians, even those that may support differing political parties, are nonetheless supporting Alberta's vision for a prosperous, energy-rich nation with strong and sovereign provinces, building a Canada we can be proud of again. Now is not the time to give up the fight.
Well, with more, we're now joined in Calgary by Lori Williams, Professor of Political Science at Mount Royal University, and in Edmonton, political columnist Graham Thomson. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, listen, Lori, I'm going to get you to start us out here because I think it's fair to say that people expected Premier Smith would have to focus on getting British Columbia on side with a pipeline to the Pacific coast. But, you know, based on what happened this weekend, it looks like she also has to convince members of her own party about the merits of this game plan. Where is this opposition coming from?
Well, it's a deeply fractious party. I mean, remember, this is a united Conservative Party that isn't very united. The Wild Rose folks and the Progressive Conservative folks are the ones that were parts of those two parties, have very different views. There's bad blood in some cases between folks that belong to those different parties, and they have sort of ideas for the future that are at the very least in tension, if not actually opposed to one another. Add to that the fact that a number of the folks that showed up this weekend were organized to try to get separatism on the agenda. They were unsuccessful at that, but they did get cheers. They did get support, particularly on Friday night. And we sort of heard them balanced a bit more on Saturday. They were trying to take over the UCP board, and actually they managed to get more of the Smith loyalists than the separatist folks onto that board. But all of these tensions and strategies and sort of pushes for power are roiling within the United Conservative Party, making it very difficult to govern.
Okay, roiling, as you say. Graham, I'll get you in on this because what is striking to me is the contrast that seems to exist here. Because on the one hand, you have Angus Reid reporting that the vast majority of Albertans support a pipeline to the West Coast, but the naysayers within the UCP itself was so vocal at this convention this weekend. What does this say about the Control Alberta hardliners or separatists? And I appreciate what Lori said, that they really want to exert their control, but what actual hold do they have on the party right now?
Well, it's a major hold. It's a real problem going back to Jason Kenney. Kenney wooed these people, the more fringe elements, and they helped turf him out. They turned on him, and then they helped make Danielle Smith leader of their party, and of course became premier. And she's been kowtowing to them ever since. And a lot of socially conservative things she's brought in when it comes to pronoun use in schools, the Bill of Rights to give protection to the willfully unvaccinated in public institutions like hospitals. She's being playing to them for several years now, and doing it again this weekend because, look, the UCP does not represent a cross-section of Albertans, and especially at the convention. People who turn up at the convention do not represent, I would say, even a cross-section of Conservatives in Alberta. As Lori pointed out, the United Conservative Party is a mixture of the old PCs, Progressive Conservatives, and the Wild Rose. So the people at the convention, a lot of them are just plain out separatists. I talked to them. And so they're angry at the deal. They say it's basically this, the pipeline deal with the federal government, with the Prime Minister, is not really a good deal. Alberta's giving up too much. And also just the idea of working with the Prime Minister, a Liberal Prime Minister, makes them really angry because they want to separate. So you have a lot of things going on here, but the people themselves that booed her on Friday are really booing when she talks about, hey, maybe things are working out now with Canada. And that's what set off the booing on Friday. And again, she got booed on Saturday, a mixed booing and some applause. But again, that's when she was saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't be throwing in the towel on Canada when things are beginning to work. And she got booed for that. So people here in the convention, I was there, really the separatists are the ones that are the dog wagging the tail some days when it comes to these party members. And Smith has been kowtowing to them, placating them for some time, and they hold enormous power over the UCP and therefore over the government as well. Okay,
so Lori, who does Premier Smith have to convince that Alberta can work with Ottawa and British Columbia on this pipeline? Is it to members of her party? Is it to the general population to get them on side so people in her party do not, get enthused to kick her out?
No, there are two different constituencies, basically. I think she's got probably most of Alberta on her side. You see that Mark Carney got 2 standing ovations on Thursday. The day before, Danielle Smith got booed for the same deal. It's pretty clear that at least the oil and gas community is on side with this. I think environmentalists would have liked a little bit more in the way of protections and guarantees, but maybe recognize, at least some of them recognize the political and economic realities of the moment. And so they are wanting very different things than this very powerful bunch of folks, very well organized bunch of folks within the United Conservative Party. And the more she placates and kowtows to that further fringe element, and there are different demands within that fringe element. Some want separatism, some want socially conservative policies, some want more liberty and protection for freedom, which may not be particularly well defined. And the more she kowtows to them, the more she risks losing the support of moderate Conservatives or moderate Albertans in general. Because for them, some of these policies are offside. We're seeing a lot of folks that are really angry about the management of the teachers' strike. We've got 14 recall petitions, most of which won't really have a shot at succeeding. A couple of them might, but the thresholds are so high they may not. We're hearing about MLAs getting inundated with people that are angry about the use of the notwithstanding clause. It's very difficult to try to manage the anger on both sides, and add to all of this the fact that some of those MLAs, they're sort of passing on the anger through caucus, but they're also in a situation where their bylaws allow for a certain number of constituency associations to force a leadership review, which is what happened to Jason Kenney. And Danielle Smith is very worried about that fringe sort of getting organized enough to push her out like they did Jason Kenney. So what wins today might lose the next election.
Mm-hmm. Which, leads me to another question here as to who is at greater risk here, at greater jeopardy, Graham? Is it the Premier when it comes to longevity, or is it the UCP itself? Because there seemed to be quite, to Lori's point, division that was being expressed over the weekend. Yeah,
this is an issue for us. It's sort of Damocles hanging over her head. Because Lori is right. The thing is, and also historically, go back to even before the UCP, Conservative Party, the old PC party in Alberta, has a real tendency, a talent for getting rid of premiers who became unpopular with the public. And of course, Kenney was forced out by his own members. And so this is still a threat hanging over her head. It doesn't necessarily even take a leadership review. It can happen behind the scenes. So right now, though, I talked to a number of people at the convention, and they're saying, look, we don't always trust Smith 100%, but she is the best that we've got. There's nobody waiting in the wings. So they do appreciate her, of course, constantly fighting with Ottawa. But Lori is right. Most people in Alberta, right now, especially the business community, really likes the idea of this pipeline. And so I think even though you get separatists who are saying it's not good, Smith is going to try and convince them. One issue we're not really talking about here is that strings attached to this pipeline. It's not as if we're going to get this built tomorrow. First of all, there's no private company saying we'll build it, but also it's contingent upon something called the Pathways Alliance. And this is a plan by oil companies and the oil sands to build a giant carbon capture and sequestration project to take emissions in the oil sands and dump them underground. That's going to cost $16.5 billion. And they're looking for government help. So the federal government's saying, yeah, okay, fine, the pipeline, we'll help you with that if you get the Pathways Alliance carbon capture program underway. That's going to cost a lot of money. So there's a lot of things going on right now, which is why you've got members of our own party and others very skeptical about whether this is actually going to go ahead. So you do have various members in the UCP, those who were applauding her on Saturday saying, she's doing all she can, and the skeptics within the party saying, we think that she's being played by Carney. Mm-hmm. So the UCP, in the past, quickly, the Conservative Party tends to survive. It's the leaders who tended to get tossed overboard.
Okay, listen, I've got less than 2 minutes here, so very quickly from each of you. Lori, I'll get you to start us off. Obviously there's a political strategy that has to be carried out by Danielle Smith internally or within the province itself. Is there a role for the federal government in this? Because I think for people in Ottawa, they worry about the national unity implications that this debate is raising.
Yeah, there absolutely is a role for Ottawa in this, especially in dealing with British Columbia and First Nations. That's something that clearly has to be done by leaders within Alberta, but it also has to come from federal leaders, and they haven't been as forthcoming or consultative, or they haven't sort of laid the foundation for an agreement up until this point. And we're still hearing Premier Eby trying to suggest different ways this could work for British Columbia. And I don't know if negotiations are going on behind the scenes, but he's still speaking publicly, and it probably would work better if those things were handled behind closed doors. And we're also seeing from Quebec, well, this is what cooperative federalism looks like, and British Columbia wasn't even at the table for this. That is raising issues for unity as well.
Mm-hmm. Graham, what would you say to that in terms of a potential role here for Ottawa?
Yeah, I think that you look at what Smith, her language has changed more for the last few months, even few weeks, when she was talking. Listen, a third of Albertans wanting to separate, and a real threat. But now on the weekend at a news conference with the media, she was saying, oh, look, when it comes to separation, maybe 35 or 37% of Albertans, looking at separation. And she tended to downplay that number. So she's really trying to present herself as someone saying, hey, listen, Albertans, we've been complaining about Ottawa for some time. We have a real path here to actually help the country become more united, and that's dealing with this pipeline, which is really, in a sense, moved from sort of gently pushing ahead the separatist sentiments, trying to backtrack on that and go in favor of, if we can just work together, BC and First Nations, we can actually build some more a pathway to a more united Canada. The problem she's having, even though I think Albertans would appreciate that,
Graham.
it's still the people in her party giving her a hard time over it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're watching, and I really appreciate the insight from both of you, as always. Lori Williams, Graham Thomson. We'll speak again, but for this evening, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
My pleasure.
Well, as you heard, there are political pitfalls around this MOU. And earlier today, I did speak with David Coletto. He is the founder and the CEO of Abacus Data. And I asked him to address the political risks that face both the Prime Minister and Alberta Premier with the agreement signed last week.
So, I mean, we're going to have a new survey out later this week that shows overwhelming support for the idea, for the MOU, for some of the details. But I think the risk is that, you know, our last poll that we completed showed the Liberals ahead by 1 point over the Conservatives. And so there's not a lot of margin for error in, you know, alienating some of your base. So I think there is some risk. If there are Liberals out there who've maybe had voted NDP in the past, voted for Mark Carney in the spring because they wanted, you know, his leadership, or they didn't want Pierre Poilievre, this might give them a real reason because of how much they care about climate change and how this just doesn't align with some of their values. So there's probably some risk, although I think it's going to take some time to see how the public digests this and how that argument's made. For the Premier in Alberta, for Danielle Smith, I think not a ton of risk. I mean, there's always a risk, I think, if you're playing too nice with Ottawa from an Alberta perspective. But look, this is an outcome that overwhelming numbers of Albertans support, as do most of those who would support the United Conservative Party in the province. So we'll see how this plays, but I think overall she's going to take this as a win and now needs to do the work to get the pipeline moving. But you know, I think she's probably coming out of this in a real positive way, because no premier before in a long time has been able to say, look, we got Ottawa's attention and they're moving on something we care about.
Our thanks there to David Coletto. Now, we also went to talk on about his latest Abacus data numbers, looking at the Prime Minister's popularity, the impact that might have on the Conservative leader's upcoming review in January. You can see the full interview with David Coletto on our website and on our YouTube channel. But that is our program for this Monday evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. We're back tomorrow night. Until then, take care.